what's up everyone, Ragey Golden Eagle here, having way too much fun as always. And I've already covered a few times how exclusivity is a great way to stop the SJWs, or any other group of busybodies for that matter, from co-opting something. That's right, exclusivity, not inclusivity. There's a reason they constantly preach inclusivity, and that's because they know if they can force you to let them in, they can quickly co-opt the whole place and then start running it. So if they are barred entry in the first place and kicked out the second those who snuck in make themselves known, they can't really accomplish much. And let's face it, like it or not, something along the lines of O'Sullivan's Law applies here as well. Any organization that isn't expressly anti-SJW will become SJW over time as they are infiltrated and subverted. Anyone that tries to be inclusive and lets everybody in will inevitably be co-opted by the SJWs, or whatever the equivalent is when you encounter this video, and everyone who disagrees with them will be at best silenced and at worst completely kicked out of their own community. It's either you or them. If you don't kick them out, they will eventually do it to you. Anyone incapable of the live and let live philosophy shouldn't be tolerated, because the second they get any sort of power over you, they will start enforcing their subjective morality onto you. So to effectively defend against them requires one strong person ruling with an iron fist, ironically enough. As long as you have one and only one person that sits at the very top and has the final say, the usual SJW subversion and co-opting tactics can't work. Unless, of course, they do something like get major blackmail on the one in charge. I've seen this enough times to know that they often resort to shit like slowly taking over moderator positions one at a time and then only inviting others of their own beliefs to be moderators, until they have the majority and can do whatever they want. But if one iron-fisted admin sits alone above all the moderators, then this admin can, if need be, get rid of the whole lot of them and replace them if they start enforcing SJW dogma on the community. The only way they can co-opt a community like that, outside of blackmailing the one in charge, is to sneak one of their own in when the torch is being passed. And that's pretty much one of the solutions I've gone over before at least once or twice. Though even I have to admit that this does come with its own issues. I, for one, have always said that a dictatorship is simultaneously the best and worst form of government possible, and it all depends on who the dictator is. And yet, if you look through history, it never fails that for every good one, like for instance with the Roman emperors, there's going to be multiple shitty ones. And from personal experience, power-tripping mods and admins are actually the #2 cause of community implosion, behind SJW infiltration. So while this method I just went over actually works very well in the short term, that being as long as the original creator remains in power and doesn't let the power get to their head, in the long term, however, this might not be the best solution. So that's why we bring up another way, one that the internet has made easier than ever, and this one can even incorporate instances of the previous one at a smaller scale. We know that the SJWs are masters at infiltrating and co-opting organizations, but we also see firsthand now how powerless they are when faced with a decentralized force with no leadership or centralized gathering grounds to be co-opted in the first place. So pretty much, as long as you keep your community leadership free, with no organization structure for them to go after, the SJWs are already pretty much completely disarmed. I mean, sure, there's going to be individual people within every community that can run their own forums or events, but nobody is required to participate in them, and if they don't like it, there are countless others they can go to instead. And that's the beauty of communities like pretty much any fandom out there. Why does a fandom even need to have a leader in the first place? Sure, in every fandom there's going to be those who are much bigger and more influential than other members, and others within the fandom might even view these as the leaders due to the exposure they get from outside of the fandom. But if something were to happen to them and they just disappeared overnight, that fandom is still going to be around. The world will keep turning without them. Yeah, sure, you may miss their content, but after a while you just forget they exist and moved on, really. And gatekeepers can't keep you out of a fandom. They can't stop you from liking or disliking something and then seeking out other like-minded people to talk about it with. These fandoms might have some centralized gathering locations, like forums for example, that can be co-opted, and often are unfortunately. But when that happens, everyone who's worth talking to just leaves and goes somewhere else. The internet makes it easy for anyone with a bit of time and spare change to host their own websites, their own forums. Or hell, you could even do it on social media for free as long as you're not doing something that would get you banned. This right here is the reason why, while SJWs have no problems co-opting companies, what with their well-defined leadership structure and all, they seem to find it completely impossible to take over the fandoms that decide whether these companies live or die. The best they can manage is to drive the real fans somewhere else, as we're actually seeing with American comics. Everyone's been crying doom and gloom at the comic industry for a while now. And while it's true that SJW infestation or not, comics was still in decline, there's no helping that. As newer forms of entertainment comes out, older ones will shrink or completely die off. But comics doesn't have to die. Just look around you. Theater is still around. Radio is still around. They just have to adapt their business model to the small niche that will always be there for them. They're never gonna be big again, but they can still manage perfectly fine with the small audience they have. But instead of doing that, the SJWs completely co-opted the industry from top to bottom, everything from local comic shops all the way up to Marvel, and they are kicking their small niche to the curb just to spite them at this point. And the result of this is to be expected. Sales numbers plummet and the industry is dying. But funny enough, they may have destroyed the current industry, but they have not destroyed the fandom or comics as a whole. In the ultimate form of decentralization, individual creators like Diversity in Comics and Ethan Van Sciver, and actually many others both before and especially now after them, are getting together and flipping the established industry the bird and just funding their own projects on their own by reaching out directly to the community. And the best part is, they are making way more money than the big industry professionals to boot. Ethan Van Sciver was a huge name at DC Comics when he worked there. And he pretty much said the money he's making off of Cyberfrog just dwarfs anything he could have made at DC for similar effort. And other pros are starting to take notice of this. And this is great. The comics fandom wasn't destroyed. It just moved on to other alternatives like manga. But now that there are some high-profile, high-quality competitors to the established comic book industry here in the US, they are coming back in force and bringing their wallets with them. Same thing with video games. The Western game industry is getting eaten alive by their own SJW infestation, so in response, Japan is quickly rising to the top of the gaming world again. Well, not all of the Japanese companies. There are a few major Japanese companies out there that seem to want to appeal to this legendary wider audience and are shooting themselves in the foot, but all this does is make their competitors even more successful. Just about every old school fan that Dead or Alive 6 is driving off with their recent announcements is probably going to end up getting Soul Calibur 6 instead. And that game would have already been successful anyway by virtue of being the next Soul Calibur game, but now it's going to be getting an additional boost on top of that when the fans of one of their primary competitors go to them. And taking this all in, this is just great. There is absolutely no way someone can be banned from an industry anymore. Yeah, sure, you can maybe cut someone off from other industry professionals when it comes to like getting advice or financial help and the like, but it's not like things like that are needed for a startup to succeed. For example, when Notch was creating Minecraft, how many diversity in gaming GDC panels do you think he had to attend to make that awesome game? I wouldn't be surprised if he never contacted anyone inside the industry. Yeah, connections help, but they're not necessary. If you have a good idea and you have the skill to make it come to fruition, you don't need these guys. So decentralization and allowing the free market to run its course are the best cure for censorship and busybodies and gatekeepers. These are all groups of people that know their ideas can't survive in a free market, so they're always going to try to destroy their competition before they are even allowed to compete, like they tried with Diversity in Comics in the comic book industry. It was announced that he got a publisher and his book was going to be going to the stores, so they bullied his publisher into dropping him. And this was after years of calling him a failed artist and saying, hey, if you're such tough shit, why don't you make a comic book and compete with us then? Then the second he accepted their challenge, they quickly decided to change their tune and said, actually, you know what, you're not allowed to compete with us. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing these scrubs just get wrecked. So if you want to keep what you love free of censorship and gatekeeping, be sure to support every policy and piece of new technology that decentralizes power and control. The more power the individual consumers are given as opposed to industries and companies, the better off we will all be. And that's all I gotta say, guys. Thanks for listening.